Hi, my name is Adriana, and today I will be doing my reading wrap-up for the month of March. So, as per usual, we will be starting with my stats. So, in the month of March, I read a total of 8 books. That was 1,719 pages with my eyeballs. The average book length of the books I read with my eyeballs was 343.8 pages. And I listened to 32 hours of audiobooks, and my physical TBR is currently at books. So, my genre breakdown was pretty all over the place in this last month. 2 fantasy, 2 nonfiction, 1 romance, 1 sci-fi, 1 literary fiction, 1 historical fiction. We're bouncing around everywhere. Everywhere we can bounce around to, we're doing it. In my audience breakdown, 7 of those 8 books was adult and 1 was young adult. In my series breakdown, 6 of them were standalones. 1 of them was the start of a series, and then 1 of them was the end of a series. In my format breakdown, 4 of them were ebooks, 1 of them was a hardback, and then 3 of them were audiobooks. As far as where I sourced these books from, most of them were from the library at 5 Books, and then 3 of them I got from the publisher, aka NetGalley. My ratings breakdown was kind of all over the place. There was a couple books I chose not to rate, and I will get into that, but I had 2 5 stars, 2 2 stars, and then 1 3 and 4 star each. My page length breakdown for the books I read were 300 to 400 pages, and then I had 1 book that was in the 400 to 500 page range. And then as far as years published, half of them were from this year, 2024, and half of them were in the very recent past, 2020 and up. So before I get into the book by book breakdown, please consider liking and commenting on this video and subscribing to my channel if you like bookish things. So starting with the book I finished earliest in March, and I actually finished it on March 1st. That was The Space Between Worlds. I actually listened to this as an audiobook because it was a reread for me. I originally read this book early-ish in my YouTube career. I can't quite remember what year I originally read this, but I recently got my request accepted from NetGalley to read the sequel that Micaiah Johnson recently came out with. So because it had been a while since I read this, I wanted to get it again. And sometimes, listening to an audiobook of a book you've already read physically can kind of lend it a new light. It was very interesting to listen to this after having read it physically, and it's just as good the second time. It's so good. This is a story that deals with the socioeconomic implications of great technological advancement that we could see in the future. So in this book, a man has invented a way to travel to parallel Earths. But the only way you can travel to a parallel Earth is if you are actually deceased on the other Earth. So when they found this out, they started kind of taking in the dregs of society to be able to do this transporting to other Earths, because these parallel Earths that we can travel to are fairly similar to our own, and it is much more likely that you are dead on another Earth if your upbringing was a little sketch. A lot of poor people, a lot of people of color, a lot of people not in the upper echelon of society are the ones who are actually doing the work and traveling to these different planets for resource gathering and data analysis reasons. And our main gal that we're following here, Kara, she gets a little roped up into some ideological mix-ups on other Earths, and it transfers into her own Earth. Own being subjective. It's very good. It's very, very good. I would highly, highly recommend reading this if you haven't yet, and I am very excited to jump into the next one because I just am excited to see what goes on, because this one wrapped itself up pretty well. So the fact that the author kind of went back and decided there was more story to be told, I'm excited to see what that is. Oh, and I guess this was one of my 5 stars this month. So just an excellent, excellent read. The next book I finished was Once Upon a Prime. This is a non-fiction book written by a math professor who also has a lot of interest in literature, and she goes through how math is integrated into the structure of literature and different allusions or references that literature makes to math throughout different time periods and whatnot. It was really, really interesting. I had a good time. I think my favorite section was the first section in which she talked about how stories are built and how you can actually like graph out like the climax and the plot of a book, and how math is integrated into like poetic structure and prose and iambic pentameter and all of those like smart people things. And it just like really gave me like a greater appreciation. Like, I've always been a math girly. I've always been able to see the beauty in math that gets kind of beaten out of it when you just look at math as like arithmetic. This is gonna be a bit of a tangent, but like it's a tangent I want to go on. The reason people think math is boring is because a lot of people don't get the opportunity to see how beautiful it can be, because you have to do so much legwork to get to the point where you can understand it. That came off really pedantic and rude. But what I'm trying to say here is like, saying math is like boring and can't be art is like the same as saying like literature couldn't be art, because all you had been exposed to in English was like in your English classes was just like spelling and grammar. Like, you need to know like how to spell and what grammar is and how to read in order to be able to appreciate literature. And like same thing with math, like you have to learn like arithmetic and pre-calc and like parts of calculus in order to be able to really enjoy how beautiful math can be. And I think the example I'm going to use here, because I think it's an example that can be understood without having to know a bunch of like random other upper math, is what's called Euler's identity. And it is the I pi plus 1 equals 0. And like there's a whole proof for this, like a whole thing with all the super detailed math, but basically all the math you really need to like appreciate this, in my opinion, is to understand like rational and irrational numbers. So E, I, and pi, I guess I not so much, but E and pi are irrational numbers, meaning they can't be written out, like written on a piece of paper as numerals. So pi, I think most people have heard of, like 3.14159.265, blah, 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 blah. It goes on forever. And E is the same way. It's like 2.7 something, maybe? And again, just goes on forever. And then I is what is called the imaginary number, and that is the square root of -1. So it's imaginary because there's no...
Okay, I botched this the first time I tried to explain this. It was just really rambly and didn't really make much sense. But basically, there is no one number you can multiply by itself to get -1. 1 times 1 is 1. -1 times -1 is also 1, because when you multiply two negatives by each other, it's a positive number. So this is imaginary because there is no one number you can multiply by itself to get -1, and that's it.
Having this I imaginary number comes in handy in like a couple different things. It's been a long time since I've taken like a math class, so I can't quite remember what exactly it's used for, but that is neither here nor there. We're not looking at the actual use cases of these irrational / imaginary numbers. What I want to focus on is the combination of these numbers that don't actually exist. We can combine them in a way that makes something rational, that makes a whole number. So taking this chaos of all these numbers that either don't exist or go on forever, there's no way to really comprehend them, and you can combine them in a way to make them something very easy to comprehend, 0, nothing, I think is really beautiful and is art. And you can appreciate it as art if you choose to. So this was a very long-winded way of saying I appreciate that this book exists because I think math is art, and I think the more we can do to de-STEMify the STEM subjects and realize the humanity and the beauty of, you know, science and math and engineering, I think it'll do better for us as a society. Because if math is art, if science is art, if engineering is art, and it affects us on a personal level, then we have to treat it with a reverence that I think our society currently does not. Like, I think society views science, technology, and math and engineering in a very utilitarian way. And I think because of that, we have a lot of detriment in those fields. I think there's a lot of people that enter those fields that don't feel the need to appreciate humanity because they don't need it in these STEM fields. And I think there is a lot of humanity in the STEM fields that needs to be addressed. So the more we can do to de-STEMify STEM, I'm here for it. The next book I finished was The Tower of Nero. This is the 5th and final book in the Trials of Apollo series, and I started this series for the Squash That Series readathon. I'm a huge Rick Riordan fan, but I just never really connected with these books, and pretty much the only reason I read this book was to just like close out the series so I could just be kind of done with it. I never really connected with Apollo and his struggle. I did appreciate, I think this last book was probably my favorite of like the whole series, but it still just didn't really do a whole lot for me. I do appreciate that we got to see this god kind of get taken down a peg, learn what it is to be human, what makes a human, but I just never really got that into it. So it's a bummer for sure because I wanted to really love this series and I just didn't particularly. The next book I read was a surprise 5-star for me, and that was Love at 350 Degrees. I originally got this as a NetGalley arc. I didn't have huge expectations for it when I got it. It just seemed like kind of a silly rom-com, and I will have like a vlog out on it later so you will get more in-depth thoughts, but just like to say here, it's a really sweet story of like two women in their 40s kind of figuring out their life and falling in love. And it's really sweet to see, for one, like full-on adult women, like not just like early 20s or like mid-20s people fumbling about, but like fully developed women with like full-on careers but like still kind of figuring stuff out, but are like, they're confident in who they are as people, so they're not trying to figure out who they are, they're just figuring out what the next steps are. And I like it. I like this book a lot. And I think their romance is so sweet, and I like that they communicate well. I like it. I like this book. And there was like a cool kind of like subplot sabotage thing, and like the whole framing device is this American Bake Off show that was very sweet, and I liked it a lot, and I really liked the contestants, and I like it. I like this book. Like, it's just very cute and sweet and saccharine, but not overly so. It was like a perfect pastry. This book is a perfect pastry. The next book I read was A Map of Future Ruins. This was an audiobook I listened to that was written by a journalist about the border skirmishes. I don't know how to say this correctly. About the immigration problems, I guess, of Syrian refugees into the EU through Greece and Turkey, and her own struggles with identity as a Greek American woman. It was really good. I would definitely recommend it for most people, I would say. Like anybody who lives in a Western country, I think could benefit from reading this or listening to it. I think it does, especially for people in America and like finding identity living in, you know, the white supremacist culture we do. I think it was really cool and very interesting. It's kind of hard to say too much about like a nonfiction book because like it is just like a nonfiction about this woman's experiences writing on immigration throughout the years and some of the horrific conditions that people have endured in order to try to make a better life for themselves. That's what you have in store if you read this book. And then next up is Interesting Facts About Space. This was a literary fiction kind of book that I just found scrolling through my Libby app one day, and it's very quirky. It's very different than a lot of the books I read. It's about a young woman's coming of age kind of, but she's like an adult, but she's kind of figuring out what she wants out of life, doing a lot of therapy, dealing with some past trauma. Yeah, I mean, it was really good. Like, actually seeing someone grow in a way that is not just like overnight. Like, she spends months and months and months in therapy and has like wins and losses, and it's like a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of situation. You actually get to see like a very realistic struggle of someone dealing with their mental health. And it was pretty fun. Like, the main character, very quirky, very silly, but also very like earnest. I liked her. I related to her quite a bit. She hates people. and I get that. And then I finished Neferura. I still have yet to figure out how to say that. I will have a vlog on this either out or coming out next week. I do not know which order I'm going to post things in, but I read this as a part of a NetGalley vlog. It is a historical fiction on Nefertiti's daughter, I want to say. Maybe not. I can't remember. But one of the daughters of a queen pharaoh and kind of her dealing with weird political things. It's very slow. It was not one of my favorite reads, I will say that. It was very, very slow. I never really connected with it all that well. This was my I think I gave it 2.5 stars maybe. No, I gave it straight up 2 stars. This was not a book I super enjoyed reading. It dealt with like an interesting topic, but just in a way that was so mind-bogglingly slow, and our main character, Neferura, like just has very little agency, and it's just very boring to read about someone in ancient prehistoric times. I guess not prehistoric, just like very ancient times, just kind of going through the motions of dealing with what's going on around her. Meh. I think it was well researched as far as I can tell, but just not my cup of tea. Very slow. And then finally, the last book I finished in March was Orphea and Eurydice. This is a gender-bent retelling of the Orpheus and Eurydice story. If you've seen Hadestown, that is the myth that this book is also based on. I appreciate what the author was trying to do with this book, but I did not connect with it. So this is another one, like I've had a couple of those this last month where it's just like, I get it, I get what the author was trying to do, and I can appreciate that, but it didn't work for me. And the gender bending in this book didn't work for me. The character choices didn't work for me. What the author chose to focus on didn't really work for me. Especially because Orpheus is such a unique character in the male pantheon of hero or Greek heroes. It really would have been interesting to have seen him explored through the lens of Greek male patriarchy instead of just like gender bending and making him a like kind of more mask female character, really exploring his masculinity as like a softer masculine figure in Greek mythology. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it wasn't for me, unfortunately. And I always seem to end on a bummer note with my wrap-ups, but this is another wrap-up. I'm ending with a bummer note. Please let me know what your favorite book of March was. Give me some good recs down below, because March was kind of meh for me. I had some good ones, I will say, but overall, not feeling super great about March. In like a lion, out like a lamb, maybe. But thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.